Hey Andrew, nice to see you here. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah, you've got some beautiful background. What books are those? I can see Hooked. And what else do you have?
You know what? I got some books back there. Um, I haven't talked about this much publicly, but I know I'm a growth nerd. 90% of my day is working at the desk in the cloud. But when I'm not working in the cloud, I really like working with my hands. And so I build things around my house. I build dining tables and coffee tables and shelves. And I have a very old home just outside of Boston in New England. And this is a very small room that really has no other purpose than an office. And it was really run down when we bought the house in 2016. And so when I started working remote full time because of the pandemic, I was like, man, I need to spruce it up. And so I actually did. This room was in bad shape. It was all beat up. It's 115 years old. So it just had
Oh,
115
wow.
years worth of patches and stuff. And so I did all the wood paneling. I made the shelves. I bought the plumbing pipe and made this whole little contraption here. So I'm very flattered that you noticed and you seem to like it. And I've just got a few books. So I think, what are some of the ones that are on here? I just read The Minimalist Entrepreneur, which is really cool, which is written by the founder of Gumroad and talks about his journey into entrepreneurship and his views on things. And then a few others that I really like. I've got some books on mindfulness, which is important to me. There's different books on like meditation and mindfulness. And I actually have the book 11 Rings by Phil Jackson, which is kind of an intersection of mindfulness and leadership training and sports and a few things like that. And then a few books on management. I think I've got The Coaching Habit, which is one of my favorites
Oh,
for
I
any
love
new,
that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
any new
yeah.
manager, any new leader. I've got High Output Management. I got them all, man. Like, I got all the dorky business books and I try to mix in a few that are important to me around mindfulness and a few other things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the coaching habit was like, in fact, it was like when I basically kind of was transitioning from like a doer to kind of like a delegator. That was actually like the first book. I was like, I need to figure it out. And it's such a wonderful book, it's a great recommendation.
What an awesome book when you transition into management. I feel like most people transition to management, they have no idea what they're doing. They make a million mistakes. Then eventually, after they get feedback from their team that people don't like working with them, then they read that book and they realize how to empower and how to delegate and um, how to ask questions to enable people. And so that's really cool. You read it towards the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was, yeah, I mean, exactly the same thoughts there. And I actually connected with the author as well, like a really nice guy. But interesting. So, I mean, like, I'm actually curious to hear about your journey, and Andrew, like you've obviously done a lot of, advising, you've been a mentor, to, perhaps a couple of people, you coach teams, that's your full-time thing, right? So why don't we just walk me through the time when, like when you actually did get your first mentorship assignment? Like, where is that time?
Kind of happened by accident for me. I never thought that I would be doing this full time. I could have never predicted it. But I feel like it's kind of in my DNA. My mom is a professional coach. She's been a professional slash executive coach my whole life, and she's always worked from home. And so I feel like coaching and mentoring and empowering people and helping them problem solve in their careers is built into my DNA because I've been hearing her do it in her office room 2 doors down from my bedroom since I was born. And so for me, I just didn't know that I would get to this place as well. And I think it kind of happened like when I worked at Wistia, I started to share a little bit about some of the things that our growth team was doing publicly. Wistia had a fairly big reach, and they would share their stories and their failures more so than other companies. There was a big appetite for that. It's a huge part of the brand. And so I started sharing things, sometimes in conferences and in talks, and other times I might write something for their blog. And through that, and I shared experiments that we did that didn't work out and things like that. And through that, other people that worked in growth reached out and they'd say, hey, I read what you wrote, or I read a talk or something like that. Can I pick your brain? Can I take you out to coffee? I'd love to learn from you because I'm on the same path. I just am a few steps earlier. And I was so flattered because who was I? I was just a normal guy making a million mistakes like anybody else in their career. I just happened to work at Wistia that had a big reach. And was able to reach other people. And so I always said yes because I was flattered and it felt good. And what I realized is that a lot of the questions that people had were challenges that I'd already faced and problems that I've already solved. And I shared my missteps in hopes of helping them avoid making the same mistakes and accelerating their journey. And people said thank you afterwards. And they wrote me notes saying, hey, that was so helpful. It was really empowering. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Could we do it again? And I was like, yeah, sure. You want to do that again? I was just telling you my life and my thoughts and helping you. I loved it. And I couldn't believe that people wanted to do more of it. And so a few years ago, I started working with my own professional coach, trying to figure out where I wanted my career to go. And she encouraged me to keep following where my energy was. And I was getting a ton of energy from these types of conversations. And she was like, well, what if you just charged? What if you just charged? What if you called it coaching or mentorship or whatever you're comfortable calling it? And what if you charge people and had a little bit more accountability? You could add a little bit more process and frameworks on your side, and you might have your next career. And I was like, man, I can't charge. Nobody's going to pay me for that. And so I tried it once and I got my first client and they started paying me and I felt all this imposter syndrome stuff and one led to another. And here I am, man. But I never thought that this is what I'd be doing, especially in the growth space, but it happened somewhat organically and it just feels right.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense because I think in our industry, there was like this motto of this growth program that I basically came across, which is basically that um, you know the the vast majority of the experience in our SaaS marketing especially is kind of in the heads of few people, right? And that knowledge needs to be unlocked. Otherwise, there's just because there's a massive talent supply shortage, especially in like SaaS marketing leadership. And it's always there. And to be honest, like I think the experiences that you shared, I was actually on the other side. So like last year was basically like I was like kind of going through like some marketing leadership challenges. And one of the people on the podcast, his name was Sanchar Shaheen. He was basically like the former VP of marketing at Hotjar and Typeform. And I was like, can you help out? And then I was like, you know what? I think the best way to kind of work with like people who are like maybe a couple of years ahead of you is to just to say that, hey, I'm also willing to pay for your time. And they'll have a commitment, and then we can make progress. So it totally makes sense.
It adds accountability on both sides, totally.
It
And what
does.
I found is um, for me, when I was working for people for free, or when I first started and I was charging, a very small amount of money, I found I was less successful because, well, one, you get lower quality clients, right? If you're not charging much or it's free, people
Yeah.
reschedule, they don't value your time, they come unprepared. You say, hey, what do you want to work on today? And they say, I don't really know. And then when you charge a little bit more, because they have more commitment, they have more skin in the game, they come prepared, they very rarely reschedule. When they do, there's a real reason and there's apologies and it's all good stuff there. But I noticed that because people were paying, they came way more prepared. They took our sessions way more seriously. They implemented the stuff that we talked about in between sessions. And because of that, they were more successful. And so it's funny how sometimes even just adding that accountability by charging and figuring out the right price increases the success that someone can have working with you, which to me was like a mind-blowing learning. I had no idea that would be the case. So it makes sense when you're starting to find your first mentor that on the flip side, you're going to get better quality mentorship. If you're paying the person, they'll be incentivized to really show up and take it seriously. It works both ways.
Yeah, makes sense. But like a question here is that, like for example, when you have the experiences that the other person has, is looking for, right? I think that's a separate thing. But being a mentor or a coach or an advisor, there's like a whole different skill set, just kind of come in with like, the like with the mindset, that, hey, you want to unlock, their thinking and questions and everything. I think so. Like, do you think like was it like after like speaking with a lot of clients, you kind of refined your mentorship skills, if I may say that? Or, was it like, did it just, come naturally for you that, hey, like you just, yeah, it just flowed naturally?
It didn't flow naturally, but I think it took me a lot of learning to find the right authentic style for me. Like before we started recording, you and I were chatting, or no, we were recording when we were chatting about the coaching habit, right? And I feel like the first time when I read that book, I had a list of questions, and I would literally go into my one-on-ones and I'd be like glancing at my questions, thinking about what question I was going to ask next. And then after you get a few reps at it, you just realize you can just listen, be really present in the moment. And the right question will come to you if you're thinking about what questions can I ask to help this person or unblock them or unlock them or whatever they need to be successful. And that's what I've learned about coaching and mentorship. So it's not that it feels natural now. I feel like the process for me has been, let me learn about all these different ways that I can help people through asking questions, through changing their perspective, through challenging, through encouraging, through rewarding, whatever it is. There's all these different tools that you have. And then finding the right one in the moment is a little bit of the art to it. And so I feel like when I first was learning, it felt very robotic and unnatural and forced and imposter and all that kind of stuff. And over time, just through repetition, it's helped me to find the right thing for the right person in the right moment. It's felt a little bit more flow state, which is good, but it just takes a while to get there.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, because yeah, I totally understand that. So I mean, what are your favorite questions when you ask in your mentorship sessions? Like, let's talk about your top three. And I mean, of course, there's this questions that are very based on market and business and all of that. But are there any questions that you really love to ask them, just to kind of unlock certain ideas?
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, I want the person who I'm coaching or mentoring to own the outcomes. I want,
Mhm.
oftentimes they come in thinking, hey, I'm encountering all these challenges. This person's going to help me figure out where to focus and how to find the answer. But I actually think that I have learned that to be backwards, where if it's me pushing, the person is never going to get to the place that I'm pushing them to because they may not agree that it's the right place to get to. So my favorite way to kick things off anytime I'm working with somebody new is, what does success look like here? If this engagement goes perfectly, not 10 out of 10, we're talking 12 out of 10, we're talking life-changing outcome. What does that look like for you? And can you describe it to me? And that's typically how I'll start things. I'll usually send an intake form before I really get going with somebody. And that's the main thing that I'm keyed in on is, what do they want to become? And then where are they at right now and what's stopping them? What do they see as the blockers that are in place of getting from the person they are today to this future state of themselves that they're really excited to get to? And then we can start to pick it apart and diagnose what they need. So that's where I really like to start. I start every session by asking, hey, if today goes perfectly, what do we walk away from this session accomplishing? And then I kind of use that to get into it, right? And then depending if they're encountering certain business challenges, we might dig into that. If they're encountering certain interpersonal challenges, we might dig into that. Influence challenges, communication challenges, whatever it may be, we can kind of dig in and use that as our jump off point. But to me, it starts very similar to a marketing or growth project. What does success look like? Can you describe it? And what's in the way, and where are you at today? And what's in the way of you getting there on your own? Because if you knew what that was, we probably wouldn't be talking and you would just be on to the next challenge. So I like to start at the highest level.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think that question is often kind of known as the miracle question, right? Like where you're basically just trying to, if everything went right, like what would that look like? What would the ideal out? And I love that question. Like, it's absolutely the best way because I think like in general, like it's always good when you can define, you know, where you want to be and where you are at. Once you've kind of defined that, it's like 50% problem solved, and then it's just the steps in between which you need to kind of figure out, right?
And what I've learned is that not everyone can describe what success looks like. That in itself, sometimes for someone who's thinking about their career or thinking about the problems that they're encountering, is hard because you don't have the benefit of perspective and space. And so all you know is, hey, I'm heads down, I'm working on this thing, I'm frustrated, I'm trying to go faster, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, help me, my hands are up in the air, so to speak. And then when you really get into it, you have to ask a bunch of questions to tease out, well, what do you really care about? What does success really look like? Is it a feeling? Are you trying to reduce stress? Are you trying to get a promotion? Are you trying to get a raise? Are you trying to move this KPI? And even just being able to tease that out in itself is difficult. And so anyways, I always start with that stuff. And if we can get a clear idea about where we're going, it's just a matter of figuring out the roadmap and the blockers along the way, much like the way I think about growth projects, right? The process is actually shockingly similar. Just there's, a whole lot of extra complexity when you're working with people versus data sets and things like that.
Yeah. And like the challenges that you just described, it just seems like it's pretty common. Like those were the exact same challenges that even I faced last year. And I was like, I was coming to my coach and be like, oh, there's just so much what to prioritize on, and like, should we be moving fast? Should we be moving budgets here? So I think it's interesting, that everybody's kind of falling through. But I guess, like, do you not feel that like, yes, there's an outcome, and yes, there's a starting point, and then you help them figure out those steps, and then the constraints, let's say, disappear. Will there ever be a time when you're working with a coaching engagement where there's just no more constraints to solve, and that's it, that the project is over? Or is that like the end? Does every relationship conclude to that?
Every relationship eventually concludes, but I don't know if it necessarily concludes where there's no more constraints and the person is running
All set.
forward. It's not, we're not in like the stock market equivalent of a bull run where it's just going up and to the right from there. But most folks that I work with, I'll work with for around 4 months, a couple times a month, depending how fast they want to go and the things that are important to them schedule wise. And typically they're coming to me to focus on 1 or 2 challenges. Either they're in a new role and they're just feeling a little bit lost and looking for some direction because they don't have anyone to help, internally. They're the most senior person in their capability and they're looking for someone external. Or it might be someone who's been in a role for a long time and just feeling stuck. And they've tried different things to get them unstuck, but they're still feeling a little bit stuck and they're looking for some help. And so for me, I specialize in working, or I only work with people that are in cross-functional growth roles and marketing roles, because that's my background. And that way, what I can do is a mix of professional coaching, but also really personalized to the challenges that people that are in those roles are facing. And so naturally, they'll ask me a few, if they're focused on moving a KPI or problem solving, we might get into like hiring plans and maybe even some like frameworks to problem solve to move different KPIs and different user experience challenges. And so we can kind of dance in and out of what do you need to advance your career and how does some of the tactical things that you're working on, relate to that. And so usually we'll work through a few challenges or we'll plan out a version of their future or vision of their future, but it's usually a few months that we'll work on. They'll achieve a new baseline and then they'll kind of graduate out from ongoing coaching with me. And they might come back and do a once a quarter session or tune up or something like that, just to kind of feel like they're continuing to move forward and learn new skills.
Yeah. And, like, if I had like I don't know, like a +1 on that, like, totally, because, like, when I'm kind of thinking, like, for me, it was also like that, that, once I kind of graduated out of my like mentorship or coaching, if we may say that, then it was like, when you're kind of thinking through future challenges, you start kind of thinking, oh, like, how would my coach react to that? And then you kind of, try to like, um, almost like fake
You
it till
can
you
picture their voice in your head asking you a question, and that in itself is like, for someone who provides mentorship and coaching, that's like the biggest compliment you can get. If somebody
Yeah.
says, hey, I was stuck on this, send me a quick note. Hey, I was stuck on this thing and I could hear your voice in my head asking me this question. That's the best, man. That's cool that you've experienced that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that makes sense. So, like, just kind of like stepping back a little bit and just kind of like, let's kind of think high level in a way that, like, what are kind of like some of the biggest challenges that kind of come to you, by marketers or growth teams on like a very high level? Like, what are like common challenges that you see coming from growth teams and marketers?
Yeah. So as I kind of mentioned, the 2 biggest buckets that I see are I'm starting a new role and I'm overwhelmed and I don't know where to begin. And I have been a really senior IC before, but now I'm in a leadership role for the first time. And I don't know what I don't know, but I'm feeling like I'm in the deep end and I'm looking for a life raft. So that's like a really common one for people that I work with. And it's not always so negative, right? I'm kind of saying the painful version of it, but the
Yeah.
other version is I'm starting a new role and I want to crush it. And I'm looking for help to get the highest level of performance and output. And I'm not always sure what that is. Can you help me? And so that's kind of one bucket that I see a lot. And then the other one is exactly what I mentioned before, which is, hey, I've been in this role for a while. I'm trying to level up. Help me. And sometimes that happens because the company grows, and all of a sudden what used to be, head of growth or head of marketing at a 30-person company is way different than when it becomes a 200-person company. And
So
if
true.
you're, yeah, and if you're
Yeah.
at one of the lucky startups, that can happen in a year. And so, rapid growth for the company, rapid growth for everybody in, in a position, especially a leadership position. And those are the people that I'll kind of problem solve with. And so some of the specific challenges that they might face are, I'm overwhelmed and I can't figure out what to work on. I have no idea how to structure my team because we're growing so fast and I can't picture what the future looks like. Help me work through that. And then another one might be, I'm having a hard time having the influence that I want to have internally. I'm either not getting the resources, or I'm not getting buy-in on my approach, or I'm getting a ton of pushback or whatever it is. And I need to change the way that I'm communicating to succeed at this level. And those are some of the common ones that I'll see across marketers and growth folks.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's very relatable. If I'm yeah, I mean, like, I think that makes a lot of sense. So let me kind of flip that question around now to you in a way that like, I'm not sure if anyone's asked you that, but like, what what's in it for you? Like, of course, the money, that's great. Like, I think that's, and also kind of like the of course, if you can get to a place where the person is able to operate and like think through your voice, how to kind of tackle constraints, that's an amazing, beautiful goal to have, right? Like, but what do you learn as a mentor? Like, even like, let's go before the paid opportunities, when you were kind of consulting people for a small fee or free. What's in it for you? Like, what has been your observation so far on that?
There's a few things in it for me. One, I love it. Like, I truly do. I would do it for free. I am blessed that I get to make money doing what I enjoy doing. But as I said, I started doing this without ever realizing it could be a career. And I do it because it feels good to help. It gives me energy. It gives me fulfillment. It gives me purpose. And that to me is really fulfilling. So I do it for that. That is my why. That is the number one thing. But now that I work for myself, I get to see patterns. When I work across lots of different people, and even though the roles are relatively similar at lots of different companies and size companies and industries and niches and things like that, that pattern recognition is super valuable. One, it helps me to problem solve with the next person. And every time I work through a new challenge with someone, I get a rep at it, right? It's a new muscle that I get to build, which makes me more valuable, which makes it more enjoyable, which helps me to continue doing what I love to do. And then on the other side of things, I make digital products as well. And so as I'm going through these sessions and I'm learning and I'm helping people problem solve, I'm also listening and thinking about, hey, what could I do to solve this at scale? Because if I'm encountering this problem with 4 people over 6 weeks, I know that there's hundreds or thousands of other people having the same exact challenge that I'm not working with. I wonder if there's something I could do to reach and impact more people. And so I don't make a ton of money through my digital products, but I have 2 digital products, which are basically related to helping people when they start new roles. I've got a digital course, and then I've also got basically like a workbook so that you can put together your own onboarding plan if you're starting as a head of growth at an A or B stage startup. And those came from direct conversations that I had from people that were in my coaching practice. So I get a lot out of it. I feel like I learn just as much as I give. And that's just kind of all part of the process for me.
Super interesting. Yeah, I mean, like, and I can totally get that. I mean, it's just like, I'm sure you're being exposed to a lot of different facets of the business from a very different point of view, and of course, you understand those challenges, and like you just explained before, right? Like, a lot of the challenges, quite common sometimes, like, and so it's good to fill them into buckets and kind of create these digital products. Was so like was the need for a digital product, like, I'm guessing you started out mentoring, you started doing these one-on-one coaching sessions and everything, but like, when did you feel that you're like, you actually need a digital product? I think there's two, like, for example, like, it totally makes sense when that there's a lot of similar questions coming, and so you create a digital product, right? Was that just, it was just like a problem solution kind of thing, or was it also like, well, there's just a lot of people that you had to turn down, and that triggered you to create these digital products. I guess like the question here is that how did the digital products fit into your mentoring strategy or your coaching business, if I may say that?
It happened by accident. I wish I could say it was completely thought out and like super strategic. But what happened was when I started my coaching practice, when I was still working full time as the head of growth at my last startup, and was doing it, a few hours a week, 2 hours a week, basically. And I had a few clients that I was kind of working with, and I knew that there was something there, and I knew my future was to do more of this. I didn't know if it would be a full-time business or what, but I was following my energy and my passion. It was leading me in this direction. And so from some of the conversations I was having, I thought, why don't I turn this into a blog post? I've encountered a few of these challenges myself. I'm seeing lots of other people that I'm coaching through the same challenges. There's something interesting here. Why don't I write it? It'll be good for my personal brand. It'll be fun for me to kind of get all my thoughts out anyways, and maybe it'll help somebody. And so I wrote this post. I published it on Medium sometime in early 2020. It's called "You Were Just Hired as the Head of Growth. Now What?" And it
I've
basically
read
just
that.
detailed.
Sorry, it's
Yeah,
just random, but I've read that post. Yeah. It's a
that's
wonderful
amazing.
post.
So I wrote this post. I clicked publish. I'm just a normal guy. I had a relatively small amount of connections, and I have, a relatively small circle. And the post kind of blew up. It got syndicated on Growth Hackers. It ended up getting tens of thousands of views within a relatively small time. And I was like, shoot, that's amazing. Like what an incredible feeling to feel like you can share something that's basically just your thoughts that you organized into this article, and all of a sudden tens of thousands of people are reading it and finding value from it. It was ranking really well in Google, and I was totally blown away. And so I was like, well, I should do something with this, right? I've worked in marketing for 8 years before I got into growth. I know I should capitalize on this. And so I made a free downloadable version of the article. And I just made a quick landing page, no content on the landing page other than like, click here to download the PDF. I literally saved the article as this really ugly PDF. I did it in Google Sheets. It couldn't have been worse, frankly. And thousands of people have downloaded it. And I was like, all right, there's something here. What if I made the download better? What if I made it into something that was truly premium, that I would pay for, that would give me extra value in the world? And so I did. And that's what led me to the digital product space. And then I learned that that could be a part of my future as well. And so I have constantly been listening for, what patterns can I recognize? Can I turn that into content, whether it's social content for LinkedIn or for Twitter or whatever, or future digital product content that I can monetize. But I kind of fell into it. I just wrote something that seemed to resonate with the space, and one thing led to another.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's interesting. Because I've actually read that article. I don't know how, like might have been through your LinkedIn or something. And it's just, yeah, it's interesting how that kind of came up. So I guess like the question after that is once you kind of created, you've been coaching, you started building digital products. And of course, there's, because of all of your experiences, working with all of these companies, you had, a lot of inbound, requests coming in that, hey, we're a small startup, we need help. Hey, we're like all sorts of challenges coming in, right? But I think to move from like doing this part-time to like doing it full-time, it might have been, a pretty, like, of course, you said, that's where your energy went, but it was still a big decision nevertheless. So like, how did you kind of scale that? Like, how did you scale, like, did you just like start saying yes to more people? Or was there kind of like a strategy behind it? I think one strategy I definitely know is that I think you started posting on LinkedIn more, and like to be honest, every post is just is great. But like I'm just curious about your thoughts there.
So I was working with my professional coach, and she kept asking me, when do you think you'll be ready to go full time? Because I had told her, I think that this is my future. I think I want to work for myself. I told you my mom's a professional coach. My dad he owns his own accounting practice. Both my parents have worked for themselves for longer than they've been my parents. And so I knew that I wanted to do this eventually in my career. I knew it since I was 20, my first job when I was 22, just fresh out of college. I just didn't know when, and I didn't know what. So I'm working with my coach, and she kept asking me, how will you know? She would talk about good questions. How will you know when you're ready? And I didn't really know how to answer. I kept saying, well, if I get more clients or I can make more money. And she'd say, well, how much money? How much money will you need to feel like, how many clients will you need? How much interest will you need? And the truth is, I didn't really have clarity. I kept changing the targets because I was scared. And today I have a 15-month-old son. And so he was very young. He was born November 2020. And so he was about 6 months old. I was working a lot. Even though I was working at home, I didn't have a ton of flexibility. And I just decided I was going to take a leap and create a different life for my family. Growing up, my parents were around. If I had a soccer practice, they could reshuffle their schedule and they would make it. And I wanted to create a life where that would be possible in my family as well. And so I decided, when was it? Late May of last year, of 2021, that it was time. And so you're right. In advance of that, probably for about 4 months in advance of that, I started posting more regularly on LinkedIn. Through that, I started, and I finally clicked publish on my deliveringvalue.co website. And through that, I started to get a little bit of inbound interest, but it wasn't really enough to make the full-time leap. But I think the challenge that I faced is one that many solopreneurs or founders face, which is I'm working full-time. And because of that, I can't dedicate more time to my business. And because I can't dedicate more time to my business, I don't really know how far I can take it. And so you end up in this like risk chasm, so to speak, where you kind of have to just make a leap. And so I did. I just made the leap knowing that the market was really hot. And if it didn't work out, I could always jump back and probably jump back into a full-time role and do that without, without wasting a ton of time or a ton of money. And fortunately, I've been in a position where I haven't needed to look back, and it's, I don't want to say it's smooth sailing because it's been a ton of work, but I have been incredibly fortunate that it has worked out thus far.
That's amazing. And and this is a bit of a personal question, feel free to answer it or not, but are you like looking back, do you feel like this was like a right decision that you made, and you're, like, was it kind of a step in the right direction for you?
I feel like I'm right where I was meant to be. I truly do. I haven't had the Sunday scaries in 6 months. I wake up every morning feeling grateful to get to do what I get to do. And the truth is, I'm fortunate in that I can work with people that I enjoy working with on problems that I find interesting. If and when I encounter people that I don't feel like I want to spend my days working with, I find a polite way to tell them thank you, but no thank you. And that's a pretty amazing place to be, to make money doing what you love to do with people that you're fortunate to spend time with. And I've got the flexibility to spend more time with my family. And for right now, this is really great.
That's amazing, and I'm super happy for you. And it is a pretty amazing work, because I know the value of like having a mentor who's like a couple of years ahead of you. Like someone actually gave me I was kind of also thinking about it myself that, a couple of years ago, if you're, let's say, an early stage marketer, right? It doesn't make sense for you to, let's say, be mentored by like Asana's head of marketing, because it won't be relatable in any way. But if, the best mentor is really just, who's a couple of years ahead of you, because then the lessons are relatable and you can kind of like, do the math, and it's just incredibly powerful and super helpful. And just, like I've always been that kind of person. Like I've always, I just kept thanking my mentors. I'm like, I'm so grateful for this call. So I mean, it totally makes sense. It can be a very fulfilling journey. So I mean, like, you've been in this, you're going to complete a year, being like a full-time advisor very soon. And then, obviously, you've done this in the past as well. So if you could look back in time, right, and just think about, if there are, let's say marketers who are, let's say, they get mentorship opportunities, what would be, like your top 3 lessons there? Like the things that you would, go back in time and tell yourself that, hey, like this is what I would do now than what I did earlier. And I think a follow-up to that would be that, do you think everyone has what it takes to be a mentor, or is it something that that just, it has to come naturally, or like, what are your thoughts there? So it's a two-part question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think in terms of the advice that I would give myself or just somebody else who's a little bit earlier on thinking about working with a mentor, the three things that I would share is you probably are encountering opportunities to find mentorship weekly and to look for them and not to waste them. And that's like something that to me, I have regret over because earlier in my career, I was fortunate to work at HubSpot. I was fortunate to work at Wistia. And through those places, both are pretty recognizable marketing brands. I got introduced to a ton of people that I was really impressed and lucky and fortunate to meet in retrospect. And most of the time, I just introduced myself and I was nervous and I tried not to say anything embarrassing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're just people that work in marketing and in tech. And some of them maybe have been fortunate enough to do presentations that and to share learnings and things in a way that have them, develop their own personal brands. But to me, I thought that they were larger in life. And so I always introduced myself and then basically ran away before I said something stupid. And in retrospect, those people, if I could have leveraged their knowledge and advice and just even the introductions that they know who I am, could have become mentors for me, but I didn't know that I could have asked them. So I think one is if you're in a role, you certainly could seek out, a coach or a mentor like myself that you could pay for, but probably you're encountering people that could be, potential mentors for you on a weekly or monthly basis. So to keep your eyes out for them, that's one thing that I would, if I could go back in time, I would do a little bit differently. Another is to be specific. So I think one of the challenges that I faced with my first mentor, at my first job, I was 20, in my early 20s, they had a mentor program at the ad agency I was working with. And I got paired with someone who's really senior, this super impressive guy. And I never knew what to ask him, right? He'd say, well, what's going on? And I'd say, well, nothing really. Or, well, I had a busy week. And he'd say, well, what challenges are you facing? I'd say, well, nothing out of the normal. I didn't know. And in retrospect, if I could have just been specific and vulnerable with him and just really shared what was going on, because I always felt like, well, my problems are so stupid. They're so nuanced to me, or it's probably just me being stupid or overreaction or whatever it is. And in retrospect, that's the best stuff to work through with a mentor. Something that's really specific, it's personalized to your situation, to get outside feedback and guidance and problem solving. That's the best stuff. So I didn't know, but to be specific would be another one. And then I think the third is kind of going off of your point to find the right mentor to find the right like product market fit as a mentor to mentee, to find that right relationship there. And so I think it's natural to go find the biggest, baddest mentor that you possibly could get access to. And maybe for some people that's an effective approach, but I think it's more effective to find someone who, to your point, is just a few steps ahead, not 20 steps ahead, but like 2 or 3. And then that way they can still remember and relate to the challenges that you're going through and maybe share some personal experiences if that's helpful to you as well. But they'll be able to help you problem solve a little bit differently than someone who's just so far ahead. So those would be the 3 things that I would think about, advice to my former self or to other folks thinking about getting a mentor.
Wonderful. I think I'd
And I
add.
forget what was the second part of the question? It was like a 2-parter. It was a good one.
Oh yeah. The second part is just kind of like, on the other side, do you think, there's I think the landscape of LinkedIn has changed things in a way that everybody is a coach now. I mean, sorry, not like, I mean, I'm blowing this up a little bit, but like, everybody's sharing stuff and
Everybody's an expert now. Yeah.
yeah, everyone is an advisor and expert, right? So I guess like is mentorship like is mentorship a skill that you develop? I mean, is that something that comes naturally, or is that like a natural progression of any, senior leadership marketer that, eventually become advisors? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's a perspective. That's what I'm curious to hear.
It's a great question. I don't know the answer is the honest truth. I think for some for some people that become experts in their craft and leaders, it's a natural part of the progression is to coach other people up, is to teach them the process that you use to get there and to help them problem solve and avoid missteps, right? Some people that's built into their DNA. And I'm sure anyone that's listening to your podcast can probably think of somebody in their career or in their life that they've encountered that has done that they look up to, but it's not a given. And so I think it depends on the person and their baseline, the thing that gives them energy and just sort of who they are as a person and what they get fulfillment from. For me, it is built into my DNA, but it's not built into everyone's, which is why some people are better at it than others. So that's my answer.
Yeah. And I agree. I think for some, like I've generally seen, I mean, there are some people who are just very good at kind of like, have a very high, I don't know if there's a thing called empathy quotient, but they have that. And then, they generally tend to be like, oh, like they tend to enjoy it. And some people try hard, they're not able to. And I think that's fine too, if they're not able to. So that, I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess like one of my last questions here would be, um, when once you work with your clients and your coaches, with your mentees, do you ever kind of document your learnings? Is there a process, not, and I'm not saying your learnings, but like your progress with the mentee? Are there certain rules that you have when you kind of work with a mentee, that hey, like for example, one rule probably could be that in every session we're just going to tackle one constraint, not multiple constraints. I'm sure that that might be a common problem where people come in with like multiple constraints. Sometimes it's about really documenting your learnings to be able to see your progress. Do you ever is there ever kind of like a standard playbook, or it's just really conversations and how those flow eventually?
It comes up somewhat naturally. I mean, the things that I think about and that I try to let people know to have productive sessions is to come and be vulnerable, and that the more you can share, the more I can help, and that this is really a safe space to problem solve and for you to gain outside perspective and guidance. So that's kind of the main thing that I think results in a productive session. And then more in terms of the nuts and bolts, anytime I start working with someone, I'll send them an intake form in advance that just asks them to reflect on a bunch of the things that we've talked about today. The person and their background, where they work, and some of the challenges that they're facing in their career, and then really to reflect on where they'd like to go, what success looks like, what they think is standing in the way. And then I always ask them, what are the things that must be included in our sessions on our agendas? And I ask them to reflect and to list that stuff out. And then what I'm doing is, before I ever kick off with them, I'm basically looking at their reflection and doing my own analysis and thinking through, hey, based on what they share, they think it's this, but I wonder if it's actually this other thing. I wonder if it's actually fear of failure that's holding them back, not lack of knowledge about frameworks. Or I wonder if it's poor cross-functional alignment or communication that's stopping them from getting hiring, not writing job descriptions and things like that. And so I'm writing out things that I want to investigate. I don't know, I can't assume, and until I really start working with someone, sometimes it even might take a few sessions before I gain confidence and clarity in my own, to validate my own hypotheses. But I'm always writing that stuff out. And the way that I document all of my calls and things is I'm constantly referring to that and reviewing that before and during sessions, so that I can dance in the moment, so to speak, if I need to, and to cover those things and to bring them up when the time is right. Because I don't want to poke at everything, at every wound, before we really are comfortable in our relationship. It's too soon, and it might not end up being a productive conversation if the person isn't ready for that. So it's a little bit of user generated information, and then my own analytical thoughts based on what they share to figure out the right things to tackle.
That is super interesting because I mean it's interesting that before a session you really think about your perspective, because when you come into a session, especially for a mentee, it's kind of like, well, this person has all the answers, he's sorted. But it's interesting, there's a lot of thought that comes beforehand. But
I
Andrew,
read something that's like, or maybe I forget where I heard it, but I heard something that was like, earlier in your career, you think you know all the answers, or you think the person above you has all the answers and makes all the right calls. And that's why they got to the place that they're at. And what you learn is that nobody has the right answers. Everybody's making the best decision they can with the information available. And that actually the most senior and most impressive people readily admit how much they still don't know, and that they're just winging it and doing the best that they can. And so I actually think that that's just part of the process. is when you're junior, you're looking for the answers. And then as you progress a little bit more, you're realizing that nobody has the answers. Let's find the best solution given the information that we know and the situation we've got. And if it's the wrong answer, we'll try the next most likely answer. And that it's more of a process to problem solve than it is intuitively just knowing the answer, you know?
So true. Because I mean, and I think another thing that I've also realized is that even sometimes the CEOs don't know the answers themselves, like a lot of times they'd come in with like a perspective and like, early on it was like, oh, the CEO must be right. He's a very experienced or, he or she's a very experienced. But then, once you kind of bring in your experience, like, oh, he or she might be wrong, so that makes total sense. But yeah, and to be honest, like one of like, and this is very similar to like, I when I used to report to like a director of marketing, like there was an advice that someone gave me, like when I was leaving, that fake it till you make it. If you want to be a head of marketing, just fake, and then eventually you'll figure it out. And then eventually, like towards the end, when you actually figure it out, you realize that 50% of all of the the growth to the head of marketing was really just Googling the answers. It was really just figuring it out, just knowing how to use Google well kind of solves everything. It's a simplified way to put it, but yeah, it's interesting um, to hear about that. But Andrew, it was such a wonderful session. I absolutely loved our conversation today. I think before we leave, just a couple of questions. First, how can people get in touch with you? I know there's so many people who are looking for mentors out there. A lot of people would love to work with, let's say an ex-director of marketing at Wistia, but let's say they didn't even get it, maybe they didn't work at Wistia. So how can they get in touch with you and perhaps even work with you?
Yeah, so the probably social media is maybe the first checkpoint. LinkedIn is the platform that I'm most active on. Relatively new to Twitter, but trying to be a little bit more active there. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. In there, I share almost daily my thoughts about growth and challenges of working in growth, and and ideas and frameworks, and I basically share a lot of the things that I've learned on my journey and the things that I learned from chatting with my clients and helping them problem solve. So LinkedIn's a great one just to learn more about me and my background. And if and when you're interested in moving forward, or even if you just want to connect and learn a little bit more, you can check out my website. It's also linked in my LinkedIn profile. It's deliveringvalue.co. And on there, you can read testimonials, hear how coaching works. If you're interested in business advising, I've got different information on there. And there's a form so you can get in touch and we can chat and learn a little bit more and see if there could be a fit.
Amazing. And I love that domain. I don't know how you got that, but delivering value, like that's straight up what you do.